Here's the mistake that keeps almost everyone stuck. Look at Harry, a salesman just like anyone else who somehow earned 5 times more than his peers. Same brain, same hours. What Harry had wasn't more confidence to start. It was the willingness to act like the person he was becoming before he felt ready. Because action doesn't follow confidence. Confidence follows action. The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. The answer that Vice President gave that day became the foundation for one of the most quietly powerful self-development books ever written. Because what Harry had, the only thing that separated him from every other rep in that room, was the size of his thinking. He thought 5 times bigger than everyone else, and so he earned 5 times more. Same brain, same hours, same opportunities, different thinking. Now, you've probably heard some version of this idea before. Mindset matters. Believe in yourself. It sounds like a poster on a school wall. But what David Schwartz did in this book is something different. He spent years studying ordinary people who outperformed their peers by 10, 20, 50 times. And he discovered something that should have been obvious, but somehow isn't. The size of your bank account, the size of your happiness, the size of your influence, none of it is determined by the size of your brain. It's determined by the size of your thinking. So how do you actually grow it? How do you make your thinking bigger? That's what I'm going to walk you through over the next hour. 7 principles that once you see them clearly, you cannot unsee. We're going to talk about belief, about the silent disease that quietly kills more careers than any other, about fear, and the only thing that actually destroys it, about the people you stand next to every day and what they're doing to your future, and about the single habit that separates people who do things from people who only mean to. By the end of this, you're going to look at your own life, your own thinking, a little differently. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Belief. The thermostat for success. Have you ever met someone who, before they even tried something, had already decided it wasn't going to work? They use these little phrases. I'll give it a shot, but I doubt it'll go anywhere. We can try, but the odds are against us. I'd love to, but realistically, listen to people for a week and you'll start hearing it everywhere. And here's what David Schwartz discovered after years of talking to people who failed at business ventures, careers, marriages, dreams. Almost every single one of them, somewhere in the conversation, would casually drop a sentence like that. To tell the truth, I didn't think it would work. They didn't fail because they were unlucky. They failed because, before they began, they had already agreed with the failure. This is what Schwartz means when he calls belief a thermostat. Think about how a thermostat actually works. It doesn't generate heat. It doesn't generate cold. All it does is set the level, and the whole room rearranges itself to match. Set it to 60, and the furnace stops trying once the room hits 60. Set it to 75, and the furnace keeps working until the room hits 75. The thermostat doesn't do the work. It just decides how much work gets done. Your belief about yourself works exactly the same way. Set your belief low, and your effort stops the moment your results hit that low ceiling. You'll unconsciously stop trying. You'll stop noticing opportunities. You'll start interpreting every setback as proof you were right not to try harder. But set your belief high, really high, and something strange happens. Your mind, your effort, your awareness, your luck, they all start working overtime to deliver the result your thermostat is asking for. Let me show you what this looks like in real life. A few years back, a state highway department put out a call. They were ready to spend $5 million building 8 new bridges. The firm that designed them would earn a 4% commission. That's $200,000 in design fees for a single contract. 21 engineering firms looked at the project. Of those 21, 4 were big firms, and all 4 immediately decided to bid. The other 17 were small. 3 engineers, 5 engineers, 7 engineers. Of those 17 small firms, 16 looked at the project, shook their heads, and walked away. Too big for us. Wish we could, but we can't. Maybe next time. And then there was the 17th firm. 3 engineers, same size as half the firms that quit, same resources, same workload. They looked at the same project, the same blueprints, the same $5 million number, and they said, "We can do it." They submitted the proposal, and they got the contract. Now think about what just happened. 16 firms were eliminated from a $200,000 opportunity, not by the client, not by the competition, not by lack of skill. They were eliminated by themselves. They turned the thermostat down before they ever picked up a pencil. The 17th firm didn't have more engineers, didn't have more experience. They just had a higher setting on the dial. Schwartz puts it like this: those who believe they can move mountains do. Those who believe they can't, cannot. Belief triggers the power to do. And this isn't motivational poster talk, it's mechanical. When you believe something is possible, your mind quietly starts looking for ways. It scans your environment for resources, for connections, for angles you missed. When you believe something is impossible, your mind does the exact same thing in reverse. It scans for reasons it won't work, and it finds them every time. Because your mind is very, very good at finding what you tell it to look for. So here's the question that should sit with you for a minute. When was the last time you walked away from something, a job, a project, a conversation, a dream, and told yourself it was because you were being realistic? How sure are you that realistic wasn't just a polite word for a thermostat you set too low? There's something else worth saying about this. People who think small almost never know they're thinking small. They think they're being practical, sensible, reasonable adults dealing with the real world. And that's the trick of it. Small thinking doesn't feel like small thinking from the inside. It feels like wisdom. It feels like maturity. It feels like the thing your parents would have approved of. Schwartz spent a lot of time around what he calls the residents of Successfulville. And the thing he noticed, over and over, was that the most successful people he met were almost never the smartest people in the room. Some of them, by his own admission, were genuinely average. Average IQ, average education, average backgrounds. But they had this one thing in common. They refused to let other people's expectations decide their own thermostat setting. He tells a story about a young fiction writer he met once. Talented, hardworking, real potential. They were having a conversation about another writer in her field, one of the top names in the industry, and she said, almost casually, "Oh, he's a wonderful writer, but of course, I could never be as successful as he is." And Schwartz almost winced, because he happened to know the famous writer she was talking about. The man wasn't a genius. He wasn't more perceptive than anyone else. He wasn't even particularly hardworking. He was just super confident. He believed he belonged at the top. And so he acted like it, performed like it, and ended up there. The young writer, by writing herself off in a single sentence over coffee, had just guaranteed she would never reach him. We do this constantly. We pre-rank ourselves before the race begins. We look at the people we admire, the people doing the things we secretly wish we were doing, and instead of seeing them as a possibility, we treat them as a ceiling. I could never be like them. That's just not who I am. We've all done it. We've all looked at someone living the life we want and quietly closed a door inside our own head. Here's what Schwartz wants you to know. Respect the people at the top. Learn from them. Study them, but don't worship them. Believe you can surpass. Believe you can go beyond. Because those who carry around a second-best attitude end up every time as second-best doers. So how do you actually adjust the thermostat? How do you raise your setting when, for as long as you can remember, it's been stuck somewhere lower than it should be? Schwartz's answer is surprisingly practical. First, and this is the one that sounds simplest, but is actually hardest, you have to stop talking yourself down. The casual self-deprecating jokes, the "oh, I'm bad with technology," the "math just isn't my thing," the "I could never do that," each of those sentences is a tiny finger on the thermostat, nudging it lower. Every single time. You don't even hear yourself saying them anymore, but your subconscious does. and your subconscious takes them as instructions. Second, surround yourself with bigger thinking. We'll come back to this in a little while when we talk about environment. But for now, just notice, the people you spend the most time with set the temperature of the room you live in. If everyone around you is set to 62, it takes enormous energy to keep your own thermostat at 75. And third, act like the person whose thermostat is already set higher than yours. Not someday, now. Walk like them, talk like them, make decisions like them. Because here's the secret, the thermostat doesn't change first. The behavior changes first, and the thermostat follows. Belief is the thermostat, and the dial is in your hand right now. The only question is whether you're willing to reach up and turn it. Chapter 2. Excusitis, the failure disease. What if I told you there's a disease that has destroyed more careers, more dreams, more lives than any virus in human history? It's not deadly in the way a real illness is. It doesn't put you in a hospital. It doesn't even make you feel sick. In fact, it feels good. It feels comforting, like a warm blanket of reasons why you couldn't possibly have done the thing you didn't do. Schwartz gave this disease a name. He called it Excusitis, and here's what's terrifying about it. Excusitis doesn't strike strangers. It strikes you, me, everyone. It comes in 4 main strains, and Schwartz spent years studying each one. The first is health excusitis. I would, but my back. I'd love to, but my energy. I can't because of my condition. The second is intelligence excusitis. I'm not smart enough. I never went to college. Those people are geniuses, I'm not. The third is age excusitis. I'm too young. I'm too old. It's too late for me. And the fourth is luck excusitis. Some people are just lucky. I wasn't born into the right family. Things never go my way. Sound familiar? Let me tell you about a man named Bill. Bill was 51 years old when he decided he wanted to go back to school. Not just back to college, back to the very beginning. He wanted a PhD in economics. Now think about what that looks like at 51. He's sitting in classes with 22-year-olds. He's the oldest person in every lecture hall. His knees ache walking across campus. He has to relearn how to study, a skill he hadn't used seriously in 30 years. Every voice around him, including the one in his own head, was probably saying, "Bill, what are you doing? You're too old for this." But Bill enrolled anyway. He sat in those lecture halls. He took the exams. He wrote the papers. And at 55, 4 years later, Bill walked across the stage and accepted his doctorate. Today, he's the chairman of the economics department at a liberal arts college. He smiles when he talks about it. I've got almost a third of my good years left. A third of his good years at 55. Now ask yourself something. How many things have you talked yourself out of because you decided you were too old? And how many of those things would have taken less time than the years you've already spent telling yourself it was too late? But here's the flip side. Because age excusitis works the other way too. Schwartz tells a story about a young man named Jerry, 23 years old, just finished college, selling for a moving company on the side. He'd been doing such a good job that his company offered him a promotion, sales manager. He'd supervise 8 other salesmen. It was a huge step up. More money, more responsibility, his own team. And Jerry came to Schwartz in a panic. "Dr. Schwartz, I've got a problem. All 8 of the men I'm supposed to supervise are between 7 and 21 years older than I am. Can I really handle this?" And Schwartz said something so simple, it's worth pausing on. "Jerry, the general manager who offered you this job obviously thinks you're old enough, or he wouldn't have offered it." Think about that for a second. The person with actual authority, the person who looked at Jerry's work, his results, his potential, had already made the decision. The only person in the entire situation who thought Jerry was too young was Jerry. That's how age excusitis works. It tells you that a number on a calendar is more important than the work you've actually done. Too old to start, too young to lead, too far along to change, too early in your career to ask. The disease doesn't care which version of the excuse you use. It only cares that you use one. So how do you cure it? How do you actually vaccinate yourself against this thing? Schwartz's prescription is brutally simple. Start by listening to your own excuses, really listening. Every time you catch yourself starting a sentence with "I can't because," stop. Finish the sentence honestly. Is what comes after that "because" actually a reason, or is it a reason you've been trained to accept? I can't switch careers because I'm 43. Bill was 51. I can't ask for the promotion because I haven't been here long enough. Jerry was 23. I can't start the business because I don't have the energy. Schwartz interviewed people who built companies while undergoing serious illness. The excuses we accept are almost never the real reasons, and the hardest version of this to face is health excusitis, because sometimes the body really is the problem. Sometimes the pain is real. Schwartz doesn't deny this. What he points out is that almost everyone, and I mean almost everyone, including people with serious conditions, knows someone in similar shape who is doing more. His advice is gentle but firm. Don't talk about your health. Don't catalog your symptoms in every conversation. Don't let the things wrong with your body become the headline of your life, because every time you say it out loud, you reinforce it, and every time you stop saying it, you free a little energy to live. Excusitis is a disease of language as much as it is a disease of belief. An intelligence excusitis? It might be the most common strain of all. Walk through any room, a school, an office, a coffee shop, and listen. You'll hear people apologizing for their own brains constantly. I'm not a numbers person. I never understood that stuff. Smart people just see things differently. Schwartz spent his career around genuinely successful people, executives, investors, authors, researchers, and he kept noticing something that didn't quite fit the storyline. A lot of them, a striking number of them, were not by any standard test particularly intelligent. They weren't dumb, but they weren't geniuses either. They were average people. What they had that the average person didn't have was a refusal to use their intelligence as a reason for anything. Two people can have the same IQ. The first one says, "I'm smart enough, I'll figure this out." The second one says, "I'm not smart enough, I should leave this to someone else." 5 years later, the first one is running the company. The second one is still complaining about how lucky the first one got. Same brain, different sentence. Which brings us to the last strain, luck excusitis, the most poisonous one of all. Because luck excusitis doesn't just hold you back, it makes you bitter. Every time someone else gets a promotion you wanted, every time someone you went to school with builds something impressive, every time a friend's business takes off, luck excusitis whispers in your ear that they got something you didn't. It wasn't fair. They had connections, they had timing, they had a head start. But here's what Schwartz observed again and again in case after case. When you actually look at the lives of the so-called lucky people, the luck disappears. What looks like luck from the outside, up close, is always a long pattern of bigger thinking, harder asking, and faster action than the people standing on the sidelines watching. The lucky salesman made more cold calls. The lucky entrepreneur asked for more meetings. The lucky person who got the promotion is the one who told their boss they wanted it. Luck, almost always, is just thinking big in slow motion. So if you've been carrying around any of these, the health excuse, the intelligence excuse, the age excuse, the luck excuse, here's the question. Which one have you been quietly handing yourself for the longest? And what would your life look like starting tomorrow morning if you simply refuse to pick it up again? Chapter 3. Confidence through action. A student walks into a professor's office. His face is pale, his shoulders are slumped. He looks like he hasn't slept in a week. The professor, David Schwartz, had called him in because the student, who was easily one of the brightest in the class, had just turned in a disastrous exam. The kind of paper that didn't match anything Schwartz knew about him. Schwartz sits him down and says, gently, "Paul, what happened? This isn't the paper I expected from you." Paul stares at his shoes for a long moment, and then he says, "Sir, after I saw that you spotted me cheating, I just went to pieces. I couldn't think. I couldn't write. This is the first time I've ever cheated, I swear. I desperately wanted an A." Now here's the thing. Schwartz hadn't seen him cheat. He had no idea the student had cheated. The reason he called Paul in was simply because the paper was beneath his usual work. Paul had been destroyed for an entire exam by a fear that existed only inside his own head. This is what fear actually is most of the time. Not a response to a real threat, a response to an imagined one. A story your mind tells you so convincingly that your body believes it. Your hands shake before a presentation that hasn't started yet. Your throat closes before a conversation you haven't had yet. Your confidence collapses before a meeting where, in reality, everything is fine. So how do you destroy fear? Because Schwartz isn't going to tell you to manage it. He's not going to tell you to breathe through it. He's going to tell you something much more uncomfortable than that. The only way to destroy fear is action. Specifically, the action you're afraid of taking. Not a smaller version of it. Not a rehearsal. Not a visualization. The actual thing. Most people get this exactly backwards. They believe confidence comes first, and then action follows. They tell themselves, once I feel ready, I'll do it. Once I feel confident, I'll speak up. Once I'm not afraid anymore, I'll start. And then they wait. They wait their whole lives, because confidence doesn't work that way. Confidence is not what produces action. Action is what produces confidence. Schwartz puts it like this: action cures fear. Indecision, postponement, dodging, those are the things that feed fear. Every time you avoid the thing you're afraid of, the fear gets a little louder. Every time you do the thing you're afraid of, even badly, even shakily, even imperfectly, the fear gets a little quieter. Schwartz tells a story about himself actually, about something he tried at elevators. You know what people are like in elevators. They stand stiff as boards, eyes on the numbers, phones out even before phones existed. Nobody talks to anybody. There's this strange unwritten rule that says you're supposed to stand silently next to a stranger for 30 seconds and then walk away without ever acknowledging they exist. So Schwartz decided to run a small experiment. 25 times in a row he said something, anything, to the stranger waiting next to him. A comment about the weather, a question about the floor they were going to, a friendly "how's your day going?" 25 times he kept count. And out of 25 conversations, 25 times, the response was warm, friendly, sometimes surprised, but always positive. 0 rejections, 0 awkward shutdowns. 25 for 25. Every single fear about talking to strangers, overcome by the act of talking to strangers. This is what Schwartz means when he says confidence is built, not born. It's not a personality trait. It's not a gift some people get and others don't. It's a callus. It forms in the exact place where you keep doing the thing that used to hurt. So why don't more people build it? Because action is uncomfortable, and there's 1,000 small ways to avoid it. You can research instead of acting. You can plan instead of acting. You can talk about acting instead of acting. In fact, and Schwartz is honest about this, one of the dangers of self-help books is that they can become a sophisticated form of procrastination. You feel productive because you learned something, but learning isn't doing, and the gap between the two is where most lives get stuck. So here's a Schwartz technique that's worth holding on to. He calls it the action first principle. When you find yourself stuck, when you're thinking about doing something but you can't quite bring yourself to start, don't wait until you feel ready. Don't wait for inspiration. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Just take the smallest physical action toward it. Open the document, pick up the phone, stand up, walk into the room, The mind follows the body, always. Once you've started, even in the smallest possible way, the fear starts to dissolve, because fear cannot exist in the same room as movement. But there's another piece to this, and it's the part most people skip. Confidence isn't just about doing scary things. It's about how you carry yourself in the in-between moments. The way you walk into a room, the way you sit in a chair, the way you make eye contact when someone speaks to you. Schwartz noticed something studying confident people. They didn't slouch, they didn't mumble, they didn't shrink into corners at parties. They took up space, not aggressively, but naturally, like they belonged in the space they occupied. And here's what was strange about it. They weren't doing it because they felt confident. A lot of them admitted, when he asked them, that they didn't feel confident at all. They were just acting the way confident people act. And after enough years of acting that way, they had become it. This is what Schwartz calls thinking confidently by acting confidently. The face you make changes the way you feel. The way you sit changes the way you think. Walk faster than the crowd, just 25% faster, and your whole nervous system starts treating you like someone with somewhere important to be. Stand up straight in a doorway before you walk into a meeting, and the meeting will go differently than it would have if you'd shuffled in with your shoulders down. So here's something to try this week. Pick one thing, just one, that you've been quietly avoiding because you're nervous about it. A phone call, a conversation, an email you keep meaning to send, something with stakes attached to it. And before you let your mind do anything else with it, before you let it list all the reasons why this might be the wrong time, or you might be the wrong person, or it might not work, just take one small physical action toward it. Open the contact, type the first sentence, stand up, then watch what happens to the fear. It doesn't disappear all at once, but it cracks. And once it cracks, it never holds you the same way again. Paul, the student who confessed to a crime he hadn't been caught for, lost an entire exam to a fear that wasn't real. How many exams in your own life? How many opportunities? How many relationships? How many versions of yourself have you already failed because of something that only existed in your head? Chapter 4. How to think big and dream big. 3 bricklayers are working on the same wall. Same job, same wage, same heat. A stranger walks past and asks each one of them what they're doing. The first bricklayer barely looks up. Laying brick, he says. The second one shrugs. Making $9 an hour? The third bricklayer stops. He sets down his trowel. He looks at the stranger with something like pride, and he says, "Me? I'm building the world's greatest cathedral." Same hands, same bricks, same wall. 3 completely different jobs. Now Schwartz asks a question that he doesn't actually answer in the story. He lets the listener do it. What do you think happened to those 3 men 20 years later? The first one, laying brick, is almost certainly still laying brick. He was never doing anything more than that, not in his own mind, and the mind sets the ceiling. The second one, making $9 an hour. Well, 20 years later, he's probably making slightly more dollars an hour, complaining about it the whole time. He was doing a transaction. The transaction is all he'll ever do. But the third bricklayer? He didn't stay a bricklayer. He couldn't have. The man who looks at a wall and sees a cathedral does not stay the man who lays the bricks of that wall. He becomes a foreman, then a contractor, then maybe an architect. Maybe he ends up designing the cathedrals other people build, not because he was smarter than the first 2. Same brain, same education, same starting wage. He just saw something bigger when he looked at the same exact thing. So here's the question. What are you looking at right now? In your job, in your relationships, in your daily life, that you're seeing too small? Schwartz tells a story about a young milkman. This is from the 1950s, so picture the era, glass bottles, deliveries at dawn, routes through quiet neighborhoods. The milkman is complaining to Schwartz one morning about a particular customer. The family at number 42, he says. They only buy 1 quart every 2 days. Not worth the stop. I'm thinking of dropping them. And Schwartz says, gently, because he knew the family, "Did you happen to notice that there's going to be a baby in that house in about a month?" The milkman went still. He looked, Schwartz says, like he'd been struck. And then he said 5 words that everyone should write down somewhere. How blind can a guy be? Today that family, that same 1 quart every 2 days family, buys 7 quarts every 2 days from a different milkman. One who didn't drop them. One who saw what could be, not just what was. How blind can we be? Most of us, when we look at our lives, we see what is. We see this job, this income, this relationship, this city, this version of ourselves, and we make all our decisions based on what we're looking at right now. But the people who live big lives, they don't see what is. They see what could be, and then they live their way into it. So how do you actually train your eye to see bigger? Because Schwartz doesn't want this to be inspirational. He wants it to be practical. He starts with something small, and I mean small. Your vocabulary. The actual words you use in your head and out loud every day. Because here's something most people never notice. The size of your language is the size of your thinking. If your words are small, I tried, I guess, kind of, sort of, if you don't mind, maybe one day, we'll see, your mind shrinks to match them. If your words are big, I will, I'm going to, this is going to work, I see exactly how to do this. Your mind expands to fill them. Schwartz isn't telling you to lie to yourself. He's telling you to stop quietly lying yourself smaller. Because that's what most of us do. We hedge every sentence. We soften every promise. We attach a little escape clause to every plan. I'd like to try writing a book, if I can find the time. I want to start a business once things settle down. I'd love to travel, maybe in a few years. You hear that, right? Every one of those sentences contains its own permission to never do it. So what's the alternative? Schwartz's alternative is what he calls visualizing what can be done. Not what is being done, not what you've done before, not what feels reasonable given where you are. What can be done? You take your job, whatever it is, and you ask, what is the biggest version of this? What would it look like if I did it at the highest level humans have ever done it? You take your relationships and you ask, what is the most loving, most generous version of how I show up to the people in my life? You take your money and you ask, what is the largest amount of value I could possibly create with what I know? And here's the strange thing. The moment you start asking those questions, you stop being a bricklayer. You don't even have to leave the wall. The wall just becomes a cathedral. Let me tell you about a woman Schwartz interviewed. She owned 3 retail stores. Not a chain, 3 independent shops she'd built one at a time. And while he was talking to her, she casually mentioned she was opening a 4th. Schwartz asked her how. Most merchants in her industry struggled to run one successfully. How was she running 4? And she told him about something she called her weekly improvement program. She said it like it was nothing, almost embarrassed to share it. Here's what it was. She divided her business into 4 areas: customers, employees, merchandise, and promotion. Throughout the week, no matter what she was doing, if an idea came to her about any of those 4 areas, she wrote it down. A scrap of paper, the back of a receipt, didn't matter. She just captured it. And then every Monday evening, she sat down for 4 hours, 4 uninterrupted hours, and she went through every single idea she'd collected that week. Not vague reviewing, specific questions. How can I attract more customers? How can I develop loyal customers? How can I make my merchandise more interesting? How can I motivate my employees? And she'd pick the 3 or 4 best ideas and figure out how to implement them that week. Every week. For years. Now think about the math of that. Most business owners think about their business when there's a problem. She thought about her business strategically, deliberately, every angle, 52 times a year. While her competitors were reacting, she was systematically improving. While they were laying brick, she was building cathedrals. Could you do something like this? Not a 4-hour Monday session necessarily, but something. A weekly hour where you don't do the work, you think about the work, where you don't answer the emails, you ask the bigger questions, where you don't live the life, you upgrade the design of the life. Schwartz has one more piece of advice in this chapter, and it's maybe the simplest of all. Stretch your thinking. Whatever you think is possible, ask yourself, what if I'm low by half? Whatever target you've set, ask, what would the target be if I were twice as ambitious? Whatever income you imagine, double it in your head and ask if that's actually unreasonable, or if it just feels unreasonable because you've never let yourself imagine it before. Schwartz isn't telling you to make insane promises to yourself. He's telling you to find out where your thermostat is actually set and then nudge it up, just a little, just enough to see what your mind starts doing when you give it permission to want more. Because here's the thing about creativity, about big ideas, about bigger lives. They're not waiting for the people who deserve them. They're waiting for the people who can see them. The milkman missed 7 quarts of business a day because he couldn't see 1 quart from 1 month away. How much of your future are you missing right now, sitting in the seat you're sitting in, because you're looking at it through eyes that are trained to see small? Adjust the eyes. Everything else follows. Chapter 5. You become your environment. Let's get brutally honest for a moment. Who are the 5 people you spend the most time with? Not who would you like to spend time with. Not who you think you should spend time with. Who in actual hours per week do you spend the most time around? Now here's the uncomfortable part. Whatever those 5 people believe is normal, that's what you believe is normal. Whatever they think is impossible, that's quietly become impossible for you too. Whatever they complain about, whatever they laugh at, whatever they take seriously, whatever they consider beneath them, all of that has been seeping into you, slowly, day after day, for years, and most of it you don't even know is there. David Schwartz puts it this way: you are judged by the company you keep, but more importantly, you become the company you keep. Schwartz tells a story about a young man in a carpool. 5 people in the car every morning, every evening, on the way to and from work. The young man was new, excited about his job, ambitious. Then he met the guy who'd been at the company for 15 years, the complainer, the one with an opinion about everything, and every opinion was negative. Every morning this man would spend the entire drive in cataloging what was wrong. The supervisor was incompetent, the products were inferior, the pay was a joke, the customers were stupid, the company policies were ridiculous. 45 minutes every morning of poison straight into the ears of the new guy who hadn't even started his workday yet. And then 45 minutes again on the way home, when he was tired and his defenses were down. Within months, the new young man was a different person. Tense, irritable, cynical. He'd arrive at work already exhausted. He'd come home depressed. He was, in his own words, becoming someone he didn't recognize. And then one day he did something brilliant. He didn't quit his job. He didn't confront the complainer. He didn't even say anything. He just quietly joined a different carpool. Same company, same commute, different car, different people. People who could see 2 sides to a question. People who occasionally said something good. People who weren't dragging him underwater for 90 minutes a day. And within weeks, his mood, his energy, his entire experience of the job completely transformed. He didn't change his work, he changed his exposure. How much of what you think is wrong with your life is actually just wrong with what you're standing next to? Schwartz makes a distinction here that's worth holding on to. He says the people in your life fall into 2 broad categories: the ones who breathe oxygen into your dreams, and the ones who quietly suffocate them. And sometimes the suffocators don't even know they're doing it. They're not bad people, they love you, they mean well, but every time you mention something you'd like to try, they list the reasons it won't work. Every time you get excited about an idea, they remind you of all the people who've tried similar things and failed. Every time you start to believe something bigger is possible, They pull out their long history of disappointments to make sure you don't get carried away. These are the people Schwartz calls, and forgive the dated phrasing, but the point is sharp, the negative news corps. Every group has them. The office has them. Families have them. Friend groups have them. They're the ones who, when something good happens to someone else, immediately find the catch. The ones who, when you share a piece of optimism, instantly counter it with a piece of pessimism. They're not trying to hurt you. They genuinely believe they're being realistic. But realism is just pessimism with a better PR department. Here's what Schwartz wants you to understand. The thoughts you think are not entirely your own. They're partly imported. They came from somewhere. From a parent, a friend, a coworker, a culture, a feed, a comment section. And if the people you're closest to think small, then small thinking is the air you've been breathing your entire life. You wouldn't even know what big air smelled like. You just assume the way it feels to be you is the way it feels to be anyone. So how do you change the air? Schwartz's answer is the same answer he gives to almost everything in this book. You take action. You don't wait until the negative people leave your life. You don't try to fix them. You don't argue them into seeing your point of view. You just, quietly, gently, without making a big deal of it, start spending more of your hours around people who lift the ceiling. Not less time with the suffocators, necessarily, but more time with the oxygen makers. The balance shifts, and as the balance shifts, you shift. Schwartz puts a name on this. He calls it going first class, not in the literal sense of buying expensive things, in the deeper sense of refusing to settle for less than the best in every part of your environment, the best people you can be around, the best information you can take in, the best standards you can hold yourself to, the best version of every choice you have any control over. He gives an example that lands hard even decades after he wrote it. He talks about a person who'd been complaining for years about not being able to afford a nicer apartment, nicer clothes, nicer anything. Schwartz asked him a question. He said, "How much would it cost you to upgrade one room of your home, just one, to something that genuinely makes you proud when you walk into it?" The man calculated. It was less money than he'd assumed. He'd been telling himself someday for so long that he'd stopped checking whether someday was actually far away. First class isn't a price tag. It's a posture. It's the refusal to live with the things that make you feel small when you could, with a small effort, surround yourself with things that make you feel large. And this extends to information too. The books you read, the voices you listen to, the conversations you choose to enter, and the ones you choose to walk away from. Every input is shaping the size of your thinking, whether you notice it or not, and most people don't notice it. They consume whatever the algorithm hands them, talk to whoever happens to be nearby, accept whatever opinions are loudest in the room, and then wonder why they feel small, anxious, stuck. But there's another part of environment that Schwartz spends real time on, and it's the most important part of all. And it's the one most people never even consider as something they can control. Your attitudes, the default mental state you walk into every situation with. Are you bringing enthusiasm, or are you bringing exhaustion? Are you bringing curiosity, or are you bringing judgment? Are you bringing belief in the people around you, or are you quietly waiting for them to disappoint you the way everyone else has? Schwartz's principle here is so simple, it's almost embarrassing. He says, broadcast good news, spread good news, be the person in the room who notices what's working. Tell people they look well. Tell them their work was excellent. Tell them their idea is interesting. Tell them you're glad to see them. Not because you're being fake, because most of what is good around you is invisible to most people, and the act of naming it out loud to someone's face is one of the highest leverage things a human being can do. Schwartz tells a story about a salesman friend who made it a rule. Every time he called on a customer, he made sure he had at least one piece of good news to share. Something positive he'd heard about that person, something a friend of theirs had said, something good happening in their industry, anything. He made it a discipline, and his customers, year after year, looked forward to his visits the way you look forward to seeing a friend who always lifts your mood. While his competitors were memorizing pitches, he was practicing the simple art of being someone people felt better around. He outsold everyone, and here's what Schwartz wants you to notice. That salesman didn't have a better product. He had a better attitude. And attitude is one of the only things in your environment that is 100% under your control. Every other input, the people, the spaces, the information, takes work to change. Your attitude can change in the next 10 seconds. So here's a question to sit with before we move on. When you walked into your house last night, or your office this morning, what did you bring through the door with you? Did you bring sunlight, or did you bring weather? Did the people who saw you feel a little lifted, or did they feel a little tired? Whatever you carry into a room, that room becomes a little more of. Make sure you're carrying something worth catching. Chapter 6. Action Beats Brilliance. 5 or 6 years before Schwartz wrote this book, a brilliant professor sat across from him at lunch and described an idea. The professor wanted to write a biography, a specific controversial figure from a few decades earlier. Schwartz listened. The idea wasn't just good, it was electric. The professor had access to sources nobody else had. He'd done preliminary research that revealed material the world hadn't seen. He had the writing skill, the academic credibility, the time. The book would have made him famous in his field. It might have changed the way an entire era was understood. Years went by. Schwartz ran into the professor again, almost by accident. Innocent question, how's the book coming? The professor's face fell. He hadn't written it, hadn't even started really. He'd been busy, he'd had responsibilities. He'd meant to, he'd planned to. He kept telling himself next month, next semester, next sabbatical. And the book that would have mattered, just sat there, year after year, until, eventually, it sat there long enough that it stopped being an idea he was going to do and became an idea he had once had. Schwartz calls this the mental graveyard, and it's the largest cemetery on Earth. Take a moment with this. Almost everyone you know is walking around with a mental graveyard. Headstones for the business they were going to start. Headstones for the book they were going to write. Headstones for the conversation they meant to have. The trip they meant to plan. The skill they meant to learn. The person they meant to become. The graveyards are vast, and the saddest part is that almost none of those ideas died because they were bad. They died because they were never acted on. So what separates the people who act from the people who only mean to? Schwartz spent years on this question, and his answer, when he finally landed on it, was almost disappointing in its simplicity. People who act don't wait until the conditions are perfect. People who don't act do. That's it. That's the whole difference. The people who write the book don't wait for the calendar to clear. They write the book in the cracks of an already busy life. The people who start the business don't wait until they have the savings. They start it with what they have. The people who have the hard conversation don't wait until the right moment. They notice that there's never a right moment, and they have the conversation anyway. Schwartz puts it like this. Conditions are never perfect. Someday is never a day on the calendar. Tomorrow is the busiest day of the year, and the year after that, and the year after that. The people who do things have made a quiet decision somewhere along the way that they will move now with what they have in the imperfect circumstances they're actually in. Not because they're braver, not because they're more confident, just because they've noticed, somewhere in their lives, that waiting is the most reliable form of losing. He has a name for the opposite mindset. He calls these people the mañana crowd. They're I'll do it tomorrow people. And he points out something almost cruel about them. They're not lazy. Most of them work very hard. They just direct their hard work toward preparation that never quite ends. They research instead of acting. They plan instead of acting. They worry about the right moment instead of acting. They convince themselves that thinking about the thing is the same as doing the thing. It isn't. It never has been. It never will be. So here's a question. What's currently sitting in your mental graveyard? Not a vague thing, a specific thing. The thing you'd be proudest of if you started this week. The thing that, if you finished it 5 years from now, would change the shape of your life. Got it? Hold it in your mind. Now ask yourself something. What is the smallest possible action you could take toward that thing today, before you go to bed, that would prove to yourself you're still alive on it? Not the big action, not the perfect action, the smallest one. Open a document, send one email, make one phone call, buy one book, write one paragraph, take one step that, if you're honest, you could have taken any time in the last 6 months, and you didn't, because the perfect version of the step felt too far away. Schwartz's principle here is one of the most important in the entire book. He says, give your ideas value by acting on them. An idea that isn't acted on is worthless, no matter how brilliant it was. An idea that is acted on, even badly, is worth more than 1,000 unexecuted geniuses. The world doesn't reward the people who thought of it first. It rewards the people who did it first. There's a phrase Schwartz uses that's worth memorizing. He says, capitalize on the magic of now. Now is the moment with the most leverage you will ever have. Not because now is special, because now is the only moment that exists. Every time you postpone something into the future, you're handing it to a person who doesn't exist yet. A future you who hasn't earned it, hasn't built the momentum for it, and hasn't proven they're more capable than the present you. Future you isn't coming to save you. Future you is whatever you build right now in the actions you take today. There's something else Schwartz says about action that's easy to miss. He says action is also a cure for self-doubt. Because when you're acting, actually moving, actually making things, actually building, you don't have the energy left over to question whether you should be. The doubt feeds on inactivity. It cannot survive in the presence of consistent motion. So if you've been stuck in your own head about something for a while, about your work, your purpose, your direction, whether you're good enough, here's a thought. The way out isn't more thinking. It isn't more journaling. It isn't more self-analysis. The way out is one small specific action in the direction you've been thinking about. Not because the action will give you the answer, because the action will quiet the question. David Schwartz isn't telling you to be reckless. He isn't telling you to skip planning. He's telling you that planning without action is a sophisticated form of avoidance. He's telling you that ideas in your head are not yours yet. They only become yours when they exist outside your head, in the world, in motion, in something someone else can see. So here's the question that should follow you out of this section. What's one thing you've been carrying in your mental graveyard, and what's the smallest shovel load of dirt you could throw on it today? By doing something, anything, that proves it isn't dead yet. Chapter 7. From Defeat to Leadership. A man sits across from David Schwartz. He is blind, not partially, completely. The world is darkness to him, and has been for years. He's talking about his work, about his life, about the way he approaches the people he meets. And he says something that, decades later, you cannot forget. He says, "My blindness is actually an asset in my career." Schwartz pauses, asks him what he means, and the man explains, "Because I can never judge anyone by their appearance. I always have to wait and find out who someone actually is. Every person I meet gets a second chance. Every person I meet gets to show me who they are with their words, with their actions, with the way they treat me, not with what they happen to look like. I never write anyone off at the door, and I want to be the kind of person who anyone from any background feels safe walking up to." He had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to him and turned it into the most valuable thing about him. This is where David Schwartz parts ways with almost every other self-help author. Most books in this genre will tell you to avoid defeat, to minimize defeat, to bounce back from defeat as quickly as possible. Schwartz tells you something different. He tells you that defeat is information, that defeat is tuition. That defeat is, almost without exception, the raw material that the largest lives are built from. But only, and this is the part everyone misses, only if you process it correctly. Schwartz lays this out with a story about an investor he knew, a man who had built real wealth in the stock market over 15 years. Schwartz asked him how he'd done it. The investor laughed. He said, "When I first started, I really got burned. I lost money on bad investments. I made every amateur mistake there is. I wanted to get rich quick, and instead I got broke quick. But I just regarded those first bad investments as part of the cost of my education. I learned what didn't work, and then I stopped doing the things that didn't work." Now compare that to other people Schwartz mentions in the same chapter. People who lost money on 1 or 2 early investments and concluded, for the rest of their lives, that the stock market was rigged, that investing was gambling, that the whole game was a scam. They took the exact same experience and built the exact opposite conclusion. One person said, "I have things to learn." The other person said, "The world is against me." And the rest of their lives followed those 2 sentences. Schwartz says it directly. Defeat is not a state of the world. Defeat is a state of mind. 2 people can experience the same setback, the same firing, the same rejection, the same loss, the same heartbreak, and one will treat it as the end of the story, while the other treats it as the middle. The difference between them isn't what happened to them. The difference is what they decided it meant. So what should it mean? How are you supposed to process a setback? Schwartz's answer is practical, and it's hard. He says, when something goes wrong, you sit down, really sit down, and you ask yourself one question: what can I learn from this that I couldn't have learned any other way? Not why did this happen to me, not who's to blame, not what does this say about me as a person. Just, what is the information here? What did this teach me about how the world actually works that I can use the next time? Because here's the thing nobody tells you about defeat. It's a much more reliable teacher than success. When something works, you don't actually know why. You assume you know, you take credit, you build a story about how you did it. But success has 1,000 authors, and most of them are invisible. Luck, timing, other people's choices, things you don't even know about. Defeat is different. Defeat usually has 1 or 2 very clear causes, and those causes, if you study them honestly, are exactly the things you need to know to do better next time. But there's a deeper layer to this chapter, and it's the one Schwartz spends his last pages on. Because in the end, this book isn't just about success. It's about leadership, about what it actually takes, not to manage people, not to give orders, but to lead a life that other people are quietly inspired by. Schwartz introduces a friend of his named Lou Gordon. Lou had been the vice president of one of Atlanta's biggest banks. He'd had a long, successful career, and one day he retired. Now, most people, when they retire, do what they've been told retirement is. They stop. They settle into the rocking chair. They wait for the days to pass. Not Lou. The day Lou retired, he opened a consulting practice. He started taking on clients. He became a national speaker. He took on a passion project building a new fraternity for young professionals. And Schwartz writes about him with real affection. He says, "Every time I see Lou, he seems younger. He's in his 60s, and he's a young 30 in spirit." Few people of any age are reaping more from life than this senior citizen who refused to be put out to pasture. What was Lou's secret? Same secret as Bill, the 51-year-old PhD student. Same secret as the 3-engineer firm that won the bridge. Same secret as the 3rd bricklayer. He kept setting his thermostat higher than the world told him was appropriate for someone his age. He kept thinking big, not because he had something to prove, but because he had figured out, somewhere along the way, that thinking big is what keeps you alive. But the story that Schwartz lingers on longest, the one that if you read this book once, you carry with you the rest of your life, is about a woman he simply calls Mrs. D. She was the mother of one of his college friends, and when her son was 2 years old, She was diagnosed with cancer. The doctors gave her a prognosis measured in months. To make it worse, her husband had died only 3 months before her diagnosis. So picture her situation. A widow, a 2-year-old son, a terminal diagnosis, the doctors offering little hope, a small retail store her husband had left her, which she now had to run alone, dying while raising a toddler. Most people in her position would have surrendered to the prognosis, and nobody would have blamed her if she had. But she made a decision. She decided that she was going to see her son through college, that she was going to keep that little store running, that she was going to live long enough to watch a 2-year-old grow into a man and walk across a stage and accept his diploma. The doctors operated on her multiple times. After each surgery, they said the same thing, just a few more months. And after each pronouncement, she went back to work. Those few more months stretched into 20 years. 20 years of a body that, by every medical reasonable expectation, should have stopped a decade and a half earlier. She raised her son. She ran the store. She watched him grow up. She watched him go to college. She watched him take his finals. She watched him walk across the stage. 6 weeks later, she was gone. Schwartz tells this story not to claim that goals can cure cancer. He's careful about that. He's not making a medical argument. What he's making is a different argument, and it's a profound one. He's saying the human capacity to keep going, to keep getting up, to keep being alive in some way that matters is dramatically larger than we let ourselves believe. And the size of what you're alive for determines the size of what you're capable of. Mrs. D didn't have 20 more years left in her body. She had 20 more years left in her purpose, and the body somehow followed. So here's where this whole book lands. The bricklayer who saw a cathedral, the engineer who said we can do it, the 51-year-old who walked back into a classroom, the salesman who outsold the room because he brought good news through the door, the blind man who turned darkness into a career asset, the widow who refused to die before her son grew up. Every single one of these people did something nobody asked them to do. Every one of them looked at a situation that other people had already decided was small and decided to see it as big. And that's leadership. Not the title, not the corner office, not the people working for you. Leadership, in the Schwartz sense, is the decision to live by a thermostat setting that the world hasn't yet given you permission to use, to carry yourself in every situation at the temperature you've decided your life is going to be, regardless of who's around you, regardless of how the day is going, regardless of what other people think is realistic. The leaders Schwartz studied weren't always loud. They weren't always charismatic. They weren't always running anything, but they were always, every one of them, set higher than the room they were standing in, and the room eventually came up to meet them. You don't have to wait to lead a company. You don't have to wait to lead a team. You can lead your own life starting tonight. The thermostat is in your hand. It's been in your hand the whole time. The key takeaways. So we've covered a lot of ground. Let's pull the most important threads together. The ideas that, if you remember nothing else from this conversation, are worth carrying into next week. First, the size of your bank account, the size of your relationships, the size of your sense of what is possible. None of that is determined by your intelligence. It's determined by your thinking. Two people with the same brain, the same education, the same starting line can build wildly different lives based on one single variable: how big they let themselves see. Second, Excusitis is real. It's everywhere, and it's almost certainly affecting you in at least one form. Health, intelligence, age, luck. Listen to your own sentences this week. Every time you start one with "I can't because," finish the sentence honestly and ask whether what comes after is actually a reason, or whether it's just a permission slip you've been writing for yourself. Third, confidence does not come before action. Confidence comes after action. If you wait until you feel ready, you'll wait forever. The fear you carry around the thing you've been avoiding will not shrink by being thought about. It only shrinks by being walked into. Fourth, the size of your language is the size of your thinking. Stop apologizing in advance. Stop softening every promise. Stop hedging every plan. The words "I'll try" are smaller than the words "I will," and your mind hears the difference, even when other people don't. Fifth, you are becoming the people you spend the most time with. This is not a metaphor, it's a measurement. If everyone around you thinks small, your thinking has been quietly shrinking for a long time, and you may not even know it. The fix isn't dramatic. You don't have to cut anyone off. You just have to start spending more of your hours around people whose thermostats are set higher than yours. Sixth, your attitude is the one thing in your environment that is completely, immediately, 100% under your control. The mood you bring into a room becomes a little of what that room is. Broadcast good news, spread good news, be the person other people feel a little lifted around. It is the highest leverage thing a single human being can do, and it costs nothing. Seventh, the mental graveyard is the largest cemetery on earth. Almost everyone is carrying one. The headstones are not for ideas that were bad. They are for ideas that were never acted on. The way to keep something out of that graveyard is the same way every time. Take one small, concrete, embarrassingly simple action toward it today. Not tomorrow, today. And eighth, defeat is information. It's the tuition you pay to learn the things that success can never teach you. The people who build big lives are not the people who avoid setbacks. They're the people who treat setbacks as data and refuse to let the data become a story about who they are. All of this, every single one of these ideas, comes back to a single principle. The size of your life is the size of your thinking. Adjust the thinking, and everything else slowly but inevitably follows. You don't need a new brain. You don't need new circumstances. You don't need to wait for permission. You need to reach up and turn the dial. One last thing before you go. I want to take you back to the very beginning of this conversation. Back to that sales meeting. Back to Harry, standing on the platform, while his vice president pointed at him and asked the room what made him different. Same brain as the other reps, same hours, same territory, but 5 times the income. We started with that story because David Schwartz built an entire book around the question it raises, and by now you know the answer he found. Harry wasn't smarter, wasn't harder working, wasn't luckier. Harry just refused, quietly, consistently, every single day, to think about himself the way the average rep thought about themselves. He carried a thermostat that was set higher than the room, and year after year, his results came up to meet his thinking. Here's what I want you to sit with after you close this video. Somewhere in your life right now, there's a place where your thermostat is set too low. You know where it is. You've known where it is for a long time. It's the part of your life you tell yourself is fine, but you wouldn't choose it if you were starting over. It's the income you say you're grateful for, while quietly knowing you've been worth more for years. It's the conversation you keep meaning to have, the skill you keep meaning to learn, the version of yourself you keep meaning to become. So here's the question to take with you. What would change in your life if, starting tomorrow morning, you simply refuse to think small about that one thing? Not all of it, not your whole life, just that one thing. What if you treated that one part of your life the way the bricklayer treated his wall, not as a job, but as a cathedral? If this video gave you something, if a story landed, if a question stuck, if you noticed yourself thinking differently about something, the book itself is worth your time. David Schwartz wrote this in 1959, and somehow, more than 60 years later, almost everything he said still applies. If you'd like to keep going deeper, the Amazon and Audible links are in the description below. The audiobook in particular is excellent. Schwartz's voice as a writer comes through. And if you've made it this far, genuinely thank you. You just sat through almost an hour of someone else's voice in your ear. That's not a small thing. If this was useful to you, the best way to let me know is to subscribe and stick around, because the next book I'm covering picks up exactly where this one leaves off. Big thinking in slow motion for the rest of your life. Reach up, turn the dial. I'll see you in the next one.